just a carefree life. We ran around without our shoes in the summertime, chickens. Everything was a family affair. Pig killing time was real interesting because farmers would congregate together. Within a 4-mile radius, you'd have farmers coming in. I can remember my uncles coming in for pig killing. If the weather was cold enough, Dad would call them in. And he had a pig killing spot right behind this house, halfway to the pig pen. And my brother got those scalding tubs that's in the ground. So my father would scald for the community because he had all the equipment. But it had to be cold, that meat had to be hung, and he'd hang that meat in that garage out there overnight and let it drain. And we would process our own meat. My mother would make sausage. My mother made crackling bread. I used to love scrapple. She'd make scrapple where you take the hog head, you use all the parts, and the chitlins, the chicken killing. My mother raised chickens and she sold eggs. And my father bought his first piece of land down the road here, 40 acres. He bought it with money my mother had saved from chicken eggs. She would raise them, keep some for eggs, but she would have to kill them when they were what we call pullets. So about 4 months in, it was prime time to kill a chicken, and so it was nothing for her to set up an assembly line with all of us. And she would put as many as 60 chickens at a time in the freezer. Oh, my mother was a chef. She used to win state fairs. Her coconut cake was the real deal. I mean, she made her own butter. And we used to have to separate the milk, the extra work, and they bring it in, and we'd add water to it so that it would cream up, and the next day we'd pour off the cream. You could see it through the little window, and she'd collect that in the back of the refrigerator. When she got a gallon of it, we would make butter. And when it made butter, you'd separate the buttermilk from the butter itself, and then she'd add salt to the butter. And then you put the butter in it and you push the paddle through and you'd have a square.
A mold.
A mold. This is called Orange Springs Road because there was a lot of natural springs everywhere before Lake Anna came in. And we used to swim in those springs. We used to go down to the bridge and that water was clear. You could see the stones on the bottom. We'd take our inner tubes down there in the summertime and swim, walk down there and swim. And my brother and I, we managed small gardens on both sides of the house. And man, nothing, nowhere near what my father used to do, because he had gardens in every field across the road, back behind my grandmother's house. But he'd do gardens of 4 rows of lima beans, 10 rows of string beans, and he'd stage them to come in different times during the season so my mother could keep up with the canning. So we still do a lot. I love it.
So the only things you went into town for to get were things like sugar and spices and
sugar and spices, coffee and tea. No, my mother would buy her own coloring. She'd get it from the Watkins man. You ever hear about the Watkins man used to come around? There used to be a guy used to come around in a little station wagon, and he'd sell seasonings, his lemon flavorings and vanilla, and Watkins liniment. You never heard of Watkins liniment? We'd buy things like saddle soap. You used to get udder cream from him. You know, your cow tits would get sore and you'd put udder cream on them. We milked our own cows. My father had several herds of cows, and there used to be a barn across the field. And during the day, he'd let the pigs roam. He could always call his animals in. And people used to tease us because they come to visit us, and the pigs would be on this side of the road just walking around. I said, well, why are these pigs in a pen? But whenever Dad called them to feed them, they'd take off and across the road back to the barn they'd go. And he would pen them up at night. And my father could move a herd of cows by himself. So, my brothers would have to do the milking. My dad never required us to really do hard labor, but for years, my father didn't have a son until his fourth child. So my sisters were like 8, 10, and they would drive his tractor. He would let them drive the tractor. My sister Sharon would rather be on the tractor with Dad out there on the farm than in the kitchen with Mom. And he would actually let them drive the tractor with the hay bales on it down this road all the way to my grandmother's house and bring loads of hay back. And they told the story, her and my sister Cynthia, and they had to be like 12, 10. They got the wheel of the wagon off the road, and they thought Daddy was going to get them. So they had to figure out how to get that wheel back in the road and bring that load of hay on home. Kids drove tractors and stuff like that back then. It was nothing. Yeah.
And you had chores as a child?
We had chores as a child, but I would go out there in that tree by the road because the branches was low. I'd climb up the tree and and the bookmobile would come around in the summer, and I'd get a whole handful of books, and I'd be up in that tree, and they'd be looking for me to do work, wash dishes. I'd be in the tree hiding.
And read.
Read the book. Read books. I love to read. You know, that's what we did. We read biographies, anything we could get our hands on. I was a reader. Well, here in this community, it was a family community, and when I was pretty young, most blacks lived in groups. Their homes were most often in group. You are aware that right up at Lahore is on Marquee Road was Freetown.
Yes.
And all of those people in that community, as well as this, we were all part of the same community. And your community was often defined by your church.
Yes.
You know.
So Bethel Baptist Church?
Bethel Baptist Church was not my church, but it was in the community. Mount Pleasant Baptist Church was my church through my dad. But my mother's church is down the road, a mile, Orange Grove Baptist Church, which is another beautiful church. So within the community, a lot of our activities always centered around the church.
Did you ever go down to Jackson's store?
Oh, absolutely, the block cheese. Mm-hmm. My dad would go down there and get blocks of bologna. It was delicious. And that block of that cheddar cheese. It was a round box. He'd bring a slice of that cheese home and with a box of crackers. Mm-hmm. And a slab of bologna. But I remember Mr. Jackson well as a child. I've always thought it was unique to go into his store because he had the wooden slots. I mean, he had the old store. My father was always, he used to talk to us about, going to the back to get food. But my generation, you could go through the front. I never experienced having to drink out of a colored fountain. I know my parents went through that and they explained that, but they always wanted us to be cautious and careful. My dad didn't like us out riding late at night. He just always was cautious about where we were and what we were doing and who was bringing us home. Because of his generation. He told a story. There was a sheriff that got shot by a black man in Orange.
Yes.
And during that time, my father went through the woods to the school to bring the kids home. And he didn't use the road to do it. He brought them home through the woods. Because they were afraid of people seeking retribution. And that had to be something to experience. My grandmother and grandfather and my father owned a combined maybe 360 acres in this area at one time. you know, and it's all road front property. If you went down the road around the corner this way or that way, you're still on Terrell land. My father also farmed my grandmother's place and my mother's place in Spotsylvania County. That was another 85 acres. So he was a busy farmer.
Do you know how they originally got the land?
Yeah, I have deeds that show the Terrell land on this side of the road. My grandfather's dad, his name was Johnny Terrell. And I think that land came off of the Coleman Plantation. At the top of this hill, you have the Coleman Plantation, and when you cross over 522 on the left, you have the Decker Plantation. I think my people came off of the Coleman Plantation. My grandfather used to talk about walking over to the Decker place and working for a dime and a biscuit, and then coming back home at night. That's what we've always called it, the Coleman Plantation. And my grandmother always told me where the slave graveyards were up there.
Right.
You know, it's a little beyond the gate. There's like a little knoll. It's a new house built in there now, but there's like a little knoll of land. And she used to always tell me that the slave graveyard was there. My dad bought this 12 acres from Kathleen Bursch, which this land used to be part of the Coleman Plantation. And in the back here is another slave graveyard because the original Coleman Plantation burned down. People didn't really talk to us about slavery. My grandfather's dad had a sister that was sold on a slave block in Fredericksburg. We do, that's a story that's been told down through the years, and nobody ever knew what happened to her. Johnny Terrell had 3 boys, George, Jim, and my grandfather Morton. And he gave his land, he took the land that he acquired and divided it up amongst his 3 sons. Those original deeds are written in hand script. I've got those deeds. They came right out of the courthouse in Orange. But my grandfather could sing songs, and you know, my only regret is he was had a deep voice, and he was a comedian, a self-made comedian, and he could sing stories to us as children, and he could mesmerize us, and none of us thought to record any of it. Not only would he sing over there, he would do one-man shows up at Life at School for the community. Just like a Eddie Murphy stand-up comedy. I've heard my aunts and different older people years ago talk about Morton Terrell and the one-man shows he would give. But he was just a character. He was just a character all around. But that's how he made his living, was in that store. And during the day, he sold groceries. The word Danton came from the black families here. It used to be Danton Post Office right here on the corner. And right here in the bottom field, right at the end of this road, used to be my Aunt Eva's house. My grandfather had a sister named Eva, and she married a Poindexter, but she ran a local post office right down here in the corner. And my grandfather ran a general merchandise store, but he ran a beer joint. That's where this store came from, and this was his second store. The first one was a wooden structure. People from 3 counties around would come here to party on Friday and Saturday nights, for real.
Wow.
And old people people that I run into who know our family, they still talk about Morton Terrell's store. They will come from Culpeper, they will come from the Fredericksburg area, Spotsylvania. That store would hold at least 200 on any Saturday night. And it would park all in the fields, all up and down this road, at least 200. It was a Dewdrop Inn.
200 people could...
At least on an average, yeah.
Inside?
Between inside and outside, you know, they'd be out back shooting crap. He had 2 wooden toilets in the back, up on the hill back there. But between the inside and the outside, And mother would make us come in the house because sometimes they get to shooting over there. They acting
Right.
crazy, they get drunk. But he had his ABC license up until the day he died. You know, Honey Wolfhawk was over there selling White Lightning. Honey Wolfhawk was from Spotsylvania. Back then, White Lightning was quite predominant here, so they weren't buying bought liquor. They were over drinking moonshine.
Which one?
And my dad found a still on this place one time. He took an axe down there and broke it up. So I don't know who locally had that, but my grandfather bought beer. He had a license, and he did beer. He didn't do liquor. But liquor was around everywhere. Grandma would actually let people come by and get bread, eggs, milk, and cheese, anything else they wanted. And she'd keep a log of what people owed. Here's a pound of lard, a pound of salmon, some milk, some flour, $1.32. July 31st, 1937. Paid by cash. He paid $3 on his bill. He still owed $1.33. She sold fried chicken. This person got some fried chicken, some fish, crackling corn, sugar, a pair of overalls. So at one time she was selling clothes over there too. My grandfather organized and was responsible for some of the biggest baseball teams in this area. And a couple of the guys that my father would oversee and manage the teams, they would play bumpers. This was called Unionville. They'd play bumpers. They might go down to Pates, Virginia, and play Pates. They'd go over to Culpeper. One of the guys went on to play for the Negro Leagues. Two of the guys that played under my father went on to play for the actual Negro Leagues back then. But baseball was the thing after Sunday. Now, on a baseball day, my grandfather built a diamond. My grandfather was a businessman. He actually built a diamond, a baseball diamond, and down here in the road behind Aunt Eva's house. And it was a cow pasture he turned into a diamond, and he would park cars on a Saturday and holidays, Labor Day. People would come from out of the cities to come down here to Morton Terrell's because they knew it was going to be a big ball game. I've seen as many as 300-400 people at those games. And my father, Ernest Terrell, managed the baseball teams and did the training. He was into sports when he was young, and that was his thing. We just found a couple of years ago bags of old baseball gloves and equipment and stuff. And he did construction. Massaponic Church, you came right by it on 629. My grandfather built that church. He's the builder. And Shady Branch Park Baptist Church, he built that as well. Wow. So he was a carpenter, and we still have some of his pews. He did it all. He made the pews for the church. He did the carvings, and I have pictures of some of his work from years ago. He was very, very talented and well respected in his time. So he was the man about town. He was well looked up in the community because he was doing building for both blacks and whites. But my father was a farmer, and my mother stayed home and raised children. And when we went to college, when it was time for college, he went to work in a factory at night in order to make additional funds, and she did too. So they were still farming by day and working in factories at night so they could send us to school. And my father was big in the Democratic Party here. Him and my grandmother, you could not go to school and have him support you in college if you did not vote. And he used to make us come home from Petersburg back home to make sure we voted. And I I remember doing that, and to this day, every child we have in this family, every one of his grandchildren, they always vote. Every single one of them, and I think that's one of the greatest legacies from their grandfather. I remember him. My father campaigned in this area for Doug Wilder. He was so very proud that he had lived to see a black governor, you know. And when Barack Obama became president, it would have been phenomenal if he could have seen that, because he always felt like eventually we would have a minority person at higher levels. But he worked the polls. And if you didn't vote, you didn't eat in here. You didn't eat here. We are probably the only black family in the county that has produced as many Negro teachers, and since, like, my aunt was the first in the 30s, and all of my sisters and brothers taught at one time or another, with the exception of one, aunts and uncles. Right here, my grandmother housed some of the first Negro teachers in this area. At Life at Elementary School, at Carver. When Carver was being built, she was part of the initial NAACP group that put that together. My aunt is in that picture. Her name was Victoria Terrell, and she was a retired teacher from this county. She taught in this county. I guess Aunt Vic taught well over 30 years. And she retired as a librarian at Unionville after it became integrated.
Wow.
When my sisters and brothers went to school, they all became teachers. My sister Cynthia came out of Norfolk State. She taught at Lightfoot, and then married and moved to Bowling Green, where she continued to teach. And she taught for 40 years. It's not been many years. She retired about 2 or 3 years ago. So that was Cynthia Terrell Golden. My sister Sharon, she taught here in the county, elementary school level, and she taught at Orange Elementary for years, and she retired from teaching here in this county. As did my brother Roland, but he taught middle school. In Locust Grove Middle School, he retired from there. It's been about 9 years ago, and he works part-time. He's a agriculture major, so he works part-time for Virginia State in a small farm program. So he watches over farmers in 2 counties, Orange, Culpeper, and Madison, I think. So,
Where did you go to school here?
I attended Orange County High School.
Orange County High School.
Lightfoot was 1 through 7,
Right.
and Orange High was 8 through 12. So Orange County High School and Lightfoot Elementary. I led the first walkout at Orange County High School.
You did what now?
Led the first walkout.
I led the first walkout at Orange County High School. We had a situation. It was a situation where they had decided. I think my year was like 3 or 4 years after integration, and kids were really beginning to. The blacks and the whites were really beginning to get along socially, because the first couple of years there wasn't any socialization or going to parties together or getting together doing things. But this was probably like 75. They had decided that blacks and whites could be voted in as princesses and attendance for homecoming.
Right.
You know how you do your votes and you make your selections. But when we came to present for the school, they decided that there was no way blacks and whites could walk in the gym together. So we couldn't escort, a white boy couldn't escort a black girl into the gym. That they had to figure out a way to pair blacks with blacks and whites with whites. And it split up the grade levels, like you were presenting, the 9th, the 10th, 11th grade. So we got real upset about it. And I'm going to tell you, some of the whites got upset about it too, because it was just stupid. Who cares who walks in with each other? But they were worried about what the older parents would think, seeing whites and blacks escorting each other's and holding hands and walking in. So we very quietly decided that we would have a peaceful withdrawal, and that's what we did. When we actually saw that that's what they were doing, about half of the grouping, we very quietly came out into the halls and congregated right in the middle of the area where the school front is. Well, of course, I was escorted to the principal's office and isolated, and I told them I had to call my mom. And I called my mom, and she told me, she says, "Don't you say anything." She says, "I'm calling Gussie Taylor." And Gussie Taylor came, right? She came right in the room. She said, "You stay in here and don't you say anything to anybody. I'm taking care of this." Today, I watched homecoming assembly, and I watched little boys bringing in little white girls on both of their arms. And every time I see it, I just say, look at this. Look at where our kids are now. And it's no thought, it's no problem anymore with that, you know. I think there's been positive growth in people's attitudes in terms of diversity. But there is still a lot of race problems in Orange. But I think a lot of those race problems is more centered around the older population than it is necessarily the new. You know, I think my generation, the racial problems and the separation of the races is probably seen as something that they might want to keep doing the way they're doing. But I think the younger kids are seeing a difference, and I see them embracing their diversity in the classroom every day, and I love that. I think as part of the upcoming generation, integration has worked. It's worked well in allowing kids to see each other on an equal level.
And
Where'd you go to college?
Virginia State University, and as did the majority of my siblings. Just about all of us went to Virginia State in Petersburg. I have one sister who graduated from Norfolk State. I came into teaching after working in administration for about 18 years. So I was a career switcher into teaching. So I've been teaching about 15 years. I was a medical administrator for years. I ran doctor's offices and medical programs. I worked for the University of Virginia. I worked for the nursing home that's in Culpeper for a couple of years, managing as their financial manager. Mainly doing that insurance billing. Now, I was born in the county. When I left college in '76, I got married and I went off and I came back here in '98. So since '98, I've been back in Virginia.
right.
And I'm no longer married. I'm divorced. So when I became divorced, I moved back home with my mom, and I've been here ever since.
What words of advice would you give the younger generation today?
That's a good way to end. Yeah.
Don't be afraid to express yourself. Be respectful. Love your neighbor. Love people. You know, embrace culture. Embrace other people's culture. Embrace the diversity. But be yourself. If something is not right, don't be afraid to stand up if you have to stand alone. Because that's something that was reared in me as a child. If you know in your heart and you're coming from a positive, righteous place, don't be afraid to be a loner.